Key point 1. Defining the addiction. Addiction is an unhealthy interaction of an individual with mood-altering stimuli. It's possible to misunderstand the scope of this concept and assume that it just covers instances of substance dependence like alcohol, nicotine, drugs, etc. However, it is vital to note that sex is also one of these triggers, since the chemical and hormonal surges that occur during it are comparable to the effects of drugs. Hence, sex may be addictive, and this addiction can destroy human life. Keep in mind that research evidence shows that most addicts develop a couple of addictions at once. For instance, around 42% of sex addicts are reported to have chemical dependencies, and 38% suffer from eating disorders. No matter what the addiction is about, the course of events always follows the same pattern. The need for a stimulant that alters one's state of mind starts to dominate the addict's life and becomes their primary focus, putting everything else on the back burner. Thus, a person develops a double life, routine daily existence, and the secret one, in which they indulge their addiction. At the crossroads of these two lives, a person loses their identity. However, it is complicated to maintain two lives that are so drastically different. Hence, the secret existence eventually comes to threaten and ruin regular life. Sexual addiction grows out of 4 negative core beliefs that poison a person's self-perception and foster the development of unhealthy behavior. I am a bad, unworthy person. No one would love me as I am. My needs will never be met if I depend upon others. And sex is my most important need. In this summary, we will dig deep into the essence of sexual addiction and discover answers to such questions as: what triggers the addiction? Where do the above-mentioned core beliefs come from? And what is the family's role in forming them? How many levels of addiction are there, and how do they vary? What is the phenomenon of co-addiction? And how can you reclaim your freedom? While our society is shifting to a more open attitude toward sexual expression, we still view the amount and kind of activity as a matter of personal choice. For the addict, however, there is no choice. Patrick Carnes. Key point 2. In a whirlpool of addiction. All sexual addicts follow a 4-step cycle that becomes more intense with each subsequent occurrence. The first step is preoccupation. It is a kind of trance or state of mind that addicts enter when sex-related ideas consume their brains. This mental condition causes a compulsive need to seek out sexual pleasure. The second step is ritualization. These are unique practices that the addict has developed for themselves as a prelude to engaging in sexual conduct. The ritual intensifies the preoccupation and awakens a sense of arousal and excitement. The culmination of the 2 above-mentioned stages is compulsive sexual behavior. In other words, the actual sexual act itself. Sexual addicts cannot exercise self-control or refrain from engaging in this conduct. After hitting the pinnacle, addicts experience despair, an overwhelming sense of complete hopelessness about their conduct and the lack of control over it. The low phase of the 4-step cycle is the misery that the addict feels after being compulsively sexual. The disappointment stems from a mix of negative feelings: guilt about not sticking to promises, pity for themselves when their actions are exceptionally embarrassing or dangerous, disgust with themselves if their addictive behavior has compromised or abused their core beliefs and principles. Remember, a drug addict's existence is like that of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The two loathe one another, yet need each other to survive. From the addict's point of view, the only way to get rid of all these frustrations and pain is to get back to the first 2 stages, which give him pleasure and joy, so he starts the addiction cycle again. As time progresses, the cycle drags the addict down the cortex to the point where the issue becomes obvious and impossible to conceal. The balance between 2 lives is ruined. However, the addict's mind, blurred with sexual euphoria, doesn't want to accept the reality. Instead, they assure themselves that everything is fine, they can stop whenever they want, and that everything is under control. However, a person's life only gets progressively worse as they become more self-absorbed, develop feelings of self-hatred, and engage in increasingly harmful behaviors. Don't forget that for the addict, trance, fostered by lengthy rituals, is often even more crucial than orgasm and sexual intercourse. They crave to proceed from desperation to exhilaration and repeat the cycle. Key point 3. Levels of addiction and their corollaries. The author believes the addict must first recognize their behavioral tendencies to break this vicious cycle. Therefore, he proposes the division of sexual addiction into 3 levels. Such a structure provides the framework necessary to notice typical behavioral patterns at every stage of addiction. relatively normal, acceptable, and tolerable behaviors, which include masturbation, compulsive relationships, centerfolds, playboy, hustler, etc., pornography, strip shows, prostitution, and anonymous sex, belong to the first level. Of course, the lion's share of Level 1 representatives do not consider themselves addicted since their acts are embedded in a widely recognized framework of sexual demands. Therefore, they can easily convince themselves that they are no different from the average person. What's more, Level 1 addicts sincerely believe they have everything under control and can stop whenever they want. According to Stanford researcher Al Cooper, 40% of the most intense cybersex users are women. Second-level acts are obtrusive enough to merit harsh legal penalties. This stage includes exhibitionism, voyeurism, voyeur exhibitionism using masturbation, indecent calls, and liberties. At this level, addicts' actions are usually targeted at specific people who become victimized. Level 3 addiction involves explicit criminal conduct such as child molesting, incest, rape, and violence, which entails devastating physical and moral consequences for the victim and criminal liability for the addict. Although the levels are characterized by a gradually increased degree of perversion, where the first in comparison with the third one seems relatively harmless, it's wrong to assume that the former is a kind of safe zone that can't destroy addicts' life. The author states that the majority of addicts belong to Level 1. Carnes offers 5 corollaries crucial to understanding addiction. Sexual addiction of every level has painful consequences for the addict and their loved ones. Addiction is not necessarily a trait of those who exhibit deviant conduct. There is no correlation between one's personality traits, gender, socioeconomic status, etc., and chances of addiction occurrence. Both intra- and inter-level sexual conduct are mutually reinforcing. And deviant sexual behavior is typically accompanied by other kinds of addiction, alcoholism, drug abuse, or overeating. Key point 4. Family illness. Family is one of the most important aspects of people's lives. It is responsible for forming the most fundamental values and behavioral patterns. Depending on the family type, these norms can positively or negatively impact members. Addiction should be seen not as a personal problem, but as a family issue. Usually, the addict's relatives try to seclude themselves from the negative aspects of the addict's actions. Their approach is to delude themselves into thinking that the problem should be resolved by the addict personally, or that there's no problem. Due to such conduct, sexual addiction and wrong sexual behavior can be transmitted from one generation to another. To understand how this works, Carnes proposes to analyze sexual addiction via 4 factors of a child's development. 1. Self-image, children's perceptions of themselves. 2. Relationships, children's perception of their social relationships. 3. Needs, children's perception of their own needs. And 4. Sexuality, children's perception of their sexual feelings and needs. The self-image of an addict-to-be is usually formed under the premise of abandonment. A child is afraid of a single thought about being left alone. Therefore, they may allow the continuance of abuse to be a part of a family, forming the "I am worthy of nothing" core belief, leading to the second one, "No one will accept me as I am." The latter resides in the domain of relationships, making a person closed and mistrusted. The addict's needs generally stem from being neglected as a child. They report that exploring their sexuality is the remedy to the lack of human care. This moment is when nurturing and sex start to intertwine. 2 core beliefs are formed. My needs are never going to be met if I have to depend upon others, and sex is my most important need. All these core beliefs have their particular function in the addiction system. Unworthiness structures the emotional base of the addict's world. Non-acceptance leads to creating a secret life. Need issue gives the necessary fuel to ignite the addiction. And sex need cements the twisted perception of nurturing. Since the family establishes the foundations and prerequisites for future addiction, the family should also be the key to fixing the issue. Treating an addict alone is useless, because if a healthy or recently cured individual returns to the sick environment, he is likely to catch the infection again. Therefore, the close circle of the addict must also participate in therapy. Phenomenon of co-addiction. As we learned in the preceding section, addiction is never a one-person issue. However, there are times when close friends and family members, motivated by good intentions and a desire to assist, instead serve to exacerbate the addict's issues. A codependent is someone who attempts to help and correct the addict without realizing the depth and causes of the problem. They will often make every effort to maintain the facade of the addict's life, making it seem as if everything's okay. Yet, this altruism does not come without a cost, since they expect no less in return from the addict. When the addict fails to change, the co-addict gets disappointed. They believe it is their fault, and they need to try harder. This line of thinking encourages the co-addict to exert even more control and pressure on the addict, subjecting them to feelings of guilt and condemnation, which will not only be ineffective, but will also encourage the addict to continue down the path of addiction. Since addicts are powerless and unable to get rid of harmful passions without expert aid, all the efforts of codependents are doomed to failure. When a relationship transforms into an addict/co-addict interaction, loving ties may turn into a prison. The question remains, why do people engage in such a problematic co-addictive relationship and don't immediately seek the help of specialists? The response is pretty straightforward and conventional. Wrong core beliefs. I am a bad, unworthy person. No one will accept me as I am, and my needs are never going to be met if I have to depend upon others. Co-addicts usually come from families where their dignity and worth have been constantly degraded. From an early age, they become accustomed to abusive and compulsive relationships. Therefore, in a personal relationship, the role of co-addict fits them perfectly. They tend to tolerate, deny, or ignore any problem because they don't deserve any better. If the secret were revealed, everyone would abandon them. Or partner sexual addiction is the price they have to pay for the relationship because they don't have love without requirements. However, unlike addicts, co-addicts do not interpret sex as the most critical need, but as the most significant expression of love. Therefore, for them, sex with an addict is proof of love, an indicator of relationship level, and a tool to manipulate an addict. Key point 5. Sexual ills of our beliefs. The origin of the behavioral patterns and triggers that lead to sex addiction remain a mystery. As ironic as it may seem, the solution has always been right in front of our eyes. It is our culture. Remember, our culture is sexually sick. For centuries, culture has carefully shaped stereotypical images of men and women, which are deeply imprinted in our subconscious. Think about all the movies, novels, and songs you're familiar with. How do they usually portray a man and a woman? In their traditional dominating position as breadwinners, men are seen as expendable warriors who can't afford to nurture their fellow humans by engaging in sincere and loving interpersonal connections. They distance themselves from feelings since they're seen as a manifestation of weakness. Men depicted in culture often perceive women as sexual objects, which protects them from emotional interactions and allows them to estimate sexual relations as a financial operation, service for money, standardization prostitution. This way, man is depicted as an economic symbol. Meanwhile, women are depicted as mothers, homemakers, and caretakers whose professional and economic potential is completely devalued. Hence, woman is shown as a sex symbol. The relationship between the two sexes also usually develops according to a standard scheme. The man is the initiator of the relationship, the dominant, and the woman is the one that follows. She is subordinate. As a result, the archetype is established. Men are superior to women and should govern, control, and finance them. Factually, such a stereotype teaches man to be a mini abuser. At the same time, a woman is automatically placed in the position of victim. These misconceptions provide a fertile ground where other sexual stereotypes may sprout and flourish. For instance, the idea that only males need sex while females can live happily without it. Due to the pressure exerted by such claims, a woman with sexual needs would likely feel humiliated to discuss them with her spouse, which might result in a covert addiction. Key point 7. Liberate yourself from addiction. Since we already know where all the mistaken ideas that fuel sexual addiction come from, our next step is understanding how to overcome them. Patrick Carnes offers us to get acquainted with the program of 12 steps to help transform dysfunctional beliefs. The first step is to recognize the issue and your incapacity to solve it on your own. Addiction, cultural imperatives, and ideas passed down through generations in the family are more powerful than the addict himself. The second and third steps are spiritual. Addicts need to express their faith in higher power, which will help them recover. The first 3 steps rearrange the first core belief to, I am a worthwhile person deserving of pride. The fourth step requires complete honesty from the addict and their family. They should share all difficulties and concerns that they have faced during addiction progression. Step 5 asks the participant to discuss and share their inventory from Step 4 with another outside person. This is done so that the addict realizes that others would not reject him after discovering his secret. Hence, the second core belief is, I am loved and accepted by people who know me as I am. Addicts may overcome their fear of depending on others by doing steps 6 and 7. To succeed, one must trust that they are not alone. God is on their side, and that other people care about them. Addicts must identify those they have hurt in Step 8 and try to make amends with them in Step 9. Thus, the addict will rewrite the third core belief in their mind to, my needs can be met by others if I let them know what I need. Steps 10 and 11 are created to guarantee addicts gradual growth. They encourage individuals to continue taking personal inventory, confess mistakes as soon as possible, and strengthen their spiritual connection to God. As part of their spiritual awakening, those who have reached Step 12 are invited to share their story and spread the word to other addicts. This way, they can share their love and support during the program. At the end of the program, ex-addicts realize that sex wasn't the thing they were searching for, but love and care. Hence, the fourth core belief transforms into sex is but one expression of my need and care for others. Did you know 12 Steps were created in 1938 by Bill Wilson for Alcoholics Anonymous and had tremendous success. Following this, therapists dealing with other addictions adapted the 12 Steps to address their clients' specific needs, giving rise to programs such as 12 Steps for Substance Abuse or Sexual Addiction, etc. Conclusion. Addiction is a pervasive, all-consuming, and destructive condition that spreads like a virus and infects everything in its path. This issue wreaks havoc on the addict's life, casts a shadow over their loved ones, and forces them into toxic codependent relationships. Never underestimate the addiction. What starts as a typical sexual attraction explained by the basic needs of the first level can develop into a full-blown catastrophe over time, turning addicts into criminals and their sex interests into victims. To prevent sexual addiction from developing in future generations, families should examine the norms and beliefs they hand down to their successors. Hiding, denying, and isolating the addict won't get them any closer to finding a solution to this issue. Sincerity, openness, kindness, and care are the keys that open the door to a healthy life. Emotions and prejudices are the main obstacles to an addiction-free life. If someone gets caught up in the web of addiction, they cannot free themselves. Their life and actions are entirely out of their control. Shaming and condemning the addict doesn't motivate them to stop. But on the contrary, it confirms their confidence in their unworthiness, and it pushes them to delve into an addiction to drown out negative emotions. Addicts may overcome addiction if they come to terms with the fact that they have a problem and then discard the negative core beliefs guiding their behavior. The addict must realize that they deserve love. They are accepted as they are. They can satisfy their needs and rely on others without fear. Sex is just a way to express feelings, and love is that thing they have been looking for. Try this. Have no shame in expressing your sexuality. Never bury your needs and desires under fear or denial. Have frank and open conversations with your partners and family on these matters. Keep in mind that the only intractable issues are the ones that people choose not to talk about.